Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome and thank you for joining us in Bitcoins and Cryptocurrency. This could be a pretty heavy topic, so I will welcome questions during the presentation. Go ahead and type in some questions if you have them during the presentation. If it's something that I'm going to cover, I will skip over it until I cover it, and then I will, of course, have a Q&A session at the end. So I'd like to start by talking, before we can talk about Bitcoins, I want to talk a little bit about currency in general. We have different types of currency. We started off with something we called representative currency. This was the example here is a silver certificate. What this means is that this dollar was backed by silver, or some bills were represented by gold. So we had gold and silver in reserve, and each dollar that was printed represented that much in precious metals. Precious metals had a value because of their scarcity, and this dollar simply represented that. You could take this silver certificate dollar into any bank, and you could transfer it for $1 in silver. Now, in 1971, we switched to a system called fiat currency. This is important to understand about because this was Richard Nixon during the Nixon shock switched us off of the gold standard. On August 15th, 1971, in his speech, I'm going to quote this here because this concept is going to be important in understanding Bitcoin as a currency. Let me lay to rest the bugaboo of what is called devaluation. If you want to buy a foreign car or take a trip abroad, market conditions may cause your dollar to buy slightly less. But if you are among the overwhelming majority of Americans who buy American-made products in America, your dollar will be worth just as much tomorrow as it is today. The effect of this action, in other words, will be to stabilize the dollar. And that was started our fiat currency. Fiat currency is currency that has no backing. It is simply backed by our faith. That is the only thing that it is backed by. Our faith in the government, our faith that we can go to a store, use this dollar bill, and receive $1 worth of products or services. This is another form of currency that's not really currency. This is called scrip. Scrip is, I'm bringing this in because this has some bearing on the concept of Bitcoin as well. Scrip is something that is not issued specifically by a government or central government. It is generally something that represents another form of currency. Could be a city or a town that would introduce scrip to try to boost the economy in that town. Or it could be in times of in the military, in times of shortage, where in a foreign war, where there's a shortage of American dollars, U.S. dollars, they can issue scrip as temporary currency, but it would represent the dollar. But of course, the dollar doesn't represent anything anymore other than, as I said, our faith. So that's a little bit about what the current currency that we use today. Now, with Bitcoin, this is what we get. We have no central government control. It's a peer-to-peer open source. This means that the money that we use, if we look at Bitcoin as a currency, and I should mention that because this is often a form of confusion, there's Bitcoin, the currency, and there's Bitcoin, the protocol. I will try to differentiate from those as I go through this presentation. Bitcoin, the currency, there's no central government, so nobody controls it. Because right now, with the Federal Reserve, we can print up money all we want because there is nothing it's not backed up by anything. We don't have to have the gold to back it up. If the government needs more money, they print more money. And as we know, the law of supply and demand, the more supply there is, the less something is worth. So the more the money is printed, the more diluted the value becomes. Satoshi Nakamoto was the inventor of Bitcoin. He invented the protocol. Now, when I say he, I'm making an assumption here because nobody really knows who Satoshi Nakamoto is. It might be a person, it might be a group of people. It could be a man, it could be a woman. It's actually a pseudonym. Satoshi Nakamoto created the paper that has become what we know as the Bitcoin protocol. Now, I want to first mention that Bitcoin, when it first came out, had absolutely no value. It was just a concept, and it was some program that was run on computers, and the people that were involved with it, the early developers of it, and the early adopters of this, really just were testing this out. It was they were running it. They could send and receive bitcoins, but it had a very little value. If anything, it was worth about a half a penny. Now, what happened was there was one person who had went out onto a Usenet message board and said, just for proof of concept, offered 10,000 bitcoins, which at the time was worth maybe about $30 or $40. Offered 10,000 bitcoins if somebody would send him a pizza. This is just to proof of concept that you could actually use bitcoins to purchase something. And I'm glad he took a picture of those pizzas. These are the two pizzas from Papa John's that were delivered to him. Someone in England took him up on that offer, received the 10,000 bitcoins, used their credit card, and purchased these two pizzas, delivered it to this gentleman. And those pizzas are worth about $120,000 based on the time when I first got into Bitcoin, when it was worth about $12 per Bitcoin. And if you look back to when Bitcoin hit its peak of $1,200 per Bitcoin, that became a $12 million pizza. I'm glad they got extra toppings on that. And if you look at it today, Bitcoin today is trading at around $350. So the pizza index, and if you Google that term pizza index, you'll find this. It's kind of a self-made pseudonym. The pizza index is about $3.5 million, which would be the value of that pizza today. That must have been one darn good pizza. So I want to just show you how this works. And we're going to do this by building a coin right here, right now. And we're going to call it Fun Coins. Let's just first discuss what would happen, how digital currency can be created. Because there's a few problems in creating a digital currency. For instance, what's to stop somebody from making copies of that same file and sending it out over and over again, making it basically an unlimited supply of money? And even if you get past that, what's to stop someone else from spoofing that, hacking into somebody and being able to duplicate that and stealing that person's money? Well, what we can do is we can start with a letter of intent. We're going to use Alice, Bob, and Charlie. In case you're wondering why we use Alice, Bob, and Charlie, it's very simple, A, B, and C. You'll find that in use a lot. So, Alice, I'm Alice, and I want to send one fun coin to Bob. And I sign it with a private key. Bitcoin is based on cryptography. That is how we get past the problem of somebody copying or spoofing the coins. So Alice has some digital money she wants to spend. She wants to send that one fun coin to Bob. So she sends that, and Bob can receive it. I'm Alice. I send one Bitcoin, but to Bob. Bob receives that Bitcoin. But again, how do we stop her from printing that Bitcoin, that fun coin, over and over again? Well, we can assign it a unique serial number. I am Alice, and I am sending one fun coin, serial number 10ABCDE, to Bob. And you can sign that again with the public key. Now, a public key, for those who don't know, there's a public key and a private key. The public key is something in cryptography that everybody can know. It's the private key that makes something secure. So to use an example of how this could work, think about a Sudoku puzzle. A Sudoku puzzle is something that you can spend, especially a really difficult one, you might spend hours trying to figure it out. That would be the equivalent of your private key. Something that you figured it out. But when you look at it to prove this it was solved correctly, it's easy to confirm because you look at it and you see no duplicates here, no duplicates here, no duplicates here. Yes, this is a correct solution. So it is something it's easy to understand the solution of, but it is something difficult to produce. That's going to be important in next step when we talk about mining Bitcoins, but that is also just a very simplistic version of what we have with the keys. So a public key is something that everybody else knows, that's how they access it, and it's your private key that confirms your public key. So now what we're going to do is that with that public key, so now Alice can go to the bank with that serial number to whoever is that central bank and send that coin to Bob. Bob can contact that bank and say, okay, Alice just sent me a coin with serial number 10ABCDE. Does she actually have this coin? And confirm that it's now in my account? But the question is, who is the bank? Where are the serial numbers stored? And how do we verify those serial numbers? That is where Bitcoin, the protocol, comes into account. So we're going to look into Bitcoin, the protocol. The way this works is that we have everybody on the network as the banker. We are sharing something called the blockchain. The blockchain is a list of every transaction since the first Bitcoin was generated. And every time there's a transaction, it is recorded in the blockchain. It is appended to the blockchain. The blockchain is now shared between everybody on the network. So if you were to go in to your computer and you were to hack your blockchain file and change it so that you have more Bitcoins, all the other computers in the world are going to disagree with that. And it's the majority that wins. Because if every other computer says, no, you don't have that, it's going to be rejected. And therefore, the money is, any funds in there are protected by that blockchain. Think of the blockchain as something that's sitting up there in the cloud, shared by everyone, that everyone has access to. It is a public record. It doesn't contain your name, but it will contain public keys, serial numbers, and where each coin and where it goes to. So, for example, this might be a very simplistic blockchain in our example of Funcoin. 0001 is Alice, 002 is Bob, etc. And then it shows that someone else, like 001001 was sent to Bob. Now, when you have a wallet on your computer, and that's a misleading term, it's really more of a keychain. But the software on your computer or on your cell phone that will confirm this money will be looking through the entire blockchain. It will see that, at the beginning, 001001 belonged to Alice, and it will see that at some point 001001 was sent to Bob. So now it knows that Bob owns that particular Funcoin. And later Bob sends it to someone else, to Charlie. Then you will see that in the blockchain, 001001 was sent to Charlie. And then now Charlie is the owner of that particular serial number. Now, those serial numbers represents the Funcoin. Now, the serial numbers in Bitcoins, when we look at Bitcoin, its worth and the value, and look at it, it's $350 a Bitcoin right now. It actually can be broken down to 8 decimal places. So that's how it becomes handleable. So each serial number can represent 1 Satoshi, which is 0.00000001 Bitcoin. Each of those represented in the blockchain. The blockchain is then protected by something called proof of work. Again, we're going to go back to that Sudoku puzzle. The Sudoku puzzle, again, it's something that is very difficult to do. It takes resources. But anybody can easily take a quick look at it and in 1 second confirm that it is correct. The proof of work is done by encrypting with SHA-256 encryption. That is a very high level of encryption. It is used by the government and military. It is something that today's computing power will not be able to crack. Who knows what will happen in 50 years if computers will be fast enough to crack it. This will be changed to a new encryption. But for right now, nobody is going to be able to crack this. So by doing this, it's easy to make the encryption. It's going to be very difficult to go the other way and to decrypt. Mining rigs. These are some computers and equipment, and this is kind of dated because in the early days it used to be done with video cards. Today they're done with much more advanced processors, but this is just an example of a typical mining rig. So these are the people who, in the early days, especially in the early days of Bitcoin, would set up these video cards and use the power in those video cards to process those SHA-256 calculations. And they are called miners. The way this works, and the reason that they are doing this is because they get a reward for this. And this is how Bitcoins are introduced. All the transactions that are done, Alice sending a Bitcoin to Bob, Bob sending a Bitcoin to Charlie, Charlie sending one back to Alice. It's all those transactions are then compiled and computed using the SHA-256, using a random nonce that's introduced to that, and it has to come up with a hash, a solution that is below a certain threshold, and that threshold can change. So it has to be, say, it has to be something that's less than 0.001. So it calculates all those transactions, it calculates the encryption on them, and the first computer that comes up with a solution, an answer, an output that is less than that threshold, is said to have solved the block and announces to all the rest of the computers on that network that it has solved the block. And then all the work on those blocks, those other computers will stop working on those blocks and start working on the next set of transactions to compute the next block. That block is added to the end of the blockchain, and the blockchain grows and is spread to all the different computers. The reward for doing this was at the very beginning 50 bitcoins. 50 bitcoins for solving that block. And every 4 years, as defined in the Bitcoin protocol, every 4 years that number would be cut in half. So today, last year it was halved, and now we're getting 25. So everybody who's a miner and successfully solves a block gets 25 bitcoins. In 3 more years, that will be halved again to 12.5. This will continue going on until all the bitcoins are distributed in the year 2140, and there will be 21 million bitcoins. Every 10 minutes, a block is solved. So every 10 minutes, a new set of 25 bitcoins is generated and added to the account of the person who solved the block and added onto the blockchain. Now, this difficulty is set to change. It's variable, and the protocol sets to change it so that if more computers start hopping onto the network to become miners and you get more computing power solving these chains and they start getting solved faster, the difficulty will increase so that it will eventually average out again to every 10 minutes. So let's review a little bit. There is a limited supply of bitcoins. Again, when we going back to what we talked about with representative currency, which was representing precious metals. Precious metals are scarce. That's why they have a value. There is a limited supply of bitcoins, so that gives them a scarcity. There will never be more than 21 million bitcoins ever generated. The blocks are generated every 10 minutes. It started with 50 bitcoins generated each block. Every 4 years, which turns out to be 210,000 blocks generated based on 10 minutes per block, it'll be halved, and then the final blocks will be generated in the year 2140. At that point, there will be 21 million bitcoins on the blockchain. So how do we use bitcoins? We talk about installing a wallet software. Now, as I said before, the term wallet is a little bit misleading because it's not really a wallet. You're not storing bitcoins on your computer. We use the term wallet because that is something we're used to. We're used to using a wallet to hold our money when we go to a store, so we use the term wallet to describe the software. But to be more accurate, we can call it a keychain because what it is really doing is it's storing your private key for your account. So let's take a look at the Bitcoin wallet software. This is an example of the main Bitcoin client. Now, other people have come out with other Bitcoin client software, but this is the one from bitcoin.org. As you can see, there's a line here for pay to. That is the address, the payment address, and that payment address is actually a public key. That long number there, that represents the address. You can put a label to it if it's somebody you're going to send Bitcoins to on a regular basis. You can send multiple Bitcoins to, you can use them over and over again by giving it a label that'll be easier to reference. But if you scan that QR code or if you copy and paste their address and you put in an amount of Bitcoins and you click send, providing that you actually have those Bitcoins, it will be sent through the network and it'll go through the blockchain. All those miners will be doing their job to calculate that you have, confirm in the blockchain that you have those Bitcoins, confirm that the account number is actually valid for someone to receive them, and then over that course of 10 minutes, it will be confirmed and permanently added to the blockchain. So that person will receive that they were sent Bitcoins, but it'll be confirmed after that first block has been generated by the miners, and it confirms that it is in their account. So this key here, that long number, that's the public key. The software, the Bitcoin wallet, is storing the private key that is used to access it. That is what the miners are comparing. Those mining software is comparing the private key to see that it is properly confirmed that it does belong to that. Using that Sudoku example, it's checking the solution, the private key, to confirm that yes, that is the valid private key for this public key, so you do have the authority to send it. Now, as far as what a lot of people wonder about Bitcoin as well, is it a currency? Is it not a currency? What the value keeps changing. And that's why I wanted to talk about. That's why I mentioned Nixon's speech when he mentioned that if you are among the overwhelming majority of Americans who buy American-made products in America, your dollar will be worth just as much tomorrow as it is today. So Bitcoin, it has fluctuated in value because it is something new. But if you right now, if I were to go into a store here in the United States, I live in America, I go into a store and I want to buy something, and the clerk says to me, this will be $10. I immediately know what that $10 is because I work with dollars all the time. That is my main currency. So I know what that $10 is. I can make a quick decision if it's worth it for me, and I will hand the clerk $10 and take my item. But let's say I traveled to Thailand and I walk into a store there, and supposing that the clerk there speaks English or I spoke Thai, and says to me that this item will be 300 baht. Well, I'm not used to bots, so I have to think in my head and do a calculation. Let's see, 300 baht, that's equal to about, I think it's about $9, and then I can make a decision now that I've translated it to dollars. Right now, with Bitcoin, being that it's a new currency that we're not used to, when we do when we do transactions in Bitcoin, we still have to do that calculation. We have to calculate what it is in dollars, and that's why people look at it at the value of it. So some people look at Bitcoin as an investment because of the fact that the value changes. That could be something similar to the foreign currency exchange market. There are people who invest in the dollar or the euro, the yen. You can invest in foreign currencies. So there are some people who do invest in Bitcoin. So somebody who saw Bitcoin rise to $1,200 per Bitcoin last year and said, "Wow, this is going crazy. This is going to the moon." And they bought it at $1,200. And they look at the value of Bitcoin today at $350. They're kicking themselves. Because they lost money. Whereas people who were in it from the beginning, or people who bought Bitcoin when it was brand new, you could be looked at, if they look at it in terms of dollars, made money. But if for people who use Bitcoin on a regular basis and use it as a currency to spend, it doesn't matter what the US dollar value is of that Bitcoin, a Bitcoin is still a Bitcoin. If you buy in Bitcoin, sell in Bitcoin, that Bitcoin is just a Bitcoin. Of course, investors have come into seeing how much money was made in Bitcoin and other currencies, other cryptocurrencies, using the Bitcoin protocol, and some using other protocols similar to the Bitcoin protocol, have emerged. So there's Bitcoin. There was also Litecoin. These were the Litecoin was one of the first alternate coins. Bitcoin used that SHA-256 with that 10 minutes to generate a block. Well, Litecoin uses a different protocol, and it does not use as much power, and it generates the blocks a lot faster. A lot of people looked at Bitcoin as being the equivalent of gold, and Litecoin being the equivalent of silver, or should I say digital gold and digital silver. And then more and more Bitcoins, or should I say alternate currencies, came into play. Some of them had a purpose, like Namecoin. Namecoin has an actual specific purpose, not as a currency, but it uses the protocol and a blockchain. But what Namecoin does is it's used to decentralize domain names. If you want to register a .com, a .net, a .org, you have to go through ICANN. That's a central authority that regulates the domain names. Just like when you put in your web browser google.com, your web browser doesn't know what google.com is. It has to go to a name server. That name server says google.com. Oh yes, that's 172.18.2.3. I'm making that number up. And it takes you to that internet address. So Namecoin is for the .bit. So it could be website.bit. That's not very common right now. It's not included in browsers, but there are add-ons and plugins that you can put into any major browser that will use the Namecoin protocol to convert addresses. The, the plus side of this is that you can purchase Namecoin using Bitcoin. You can purchase Namecoin and then spend that Namecoin to register a domain name. You can register your company.bit. Eventually, if it becomes more popular, the publishers of all the browsers will include that in there. But for right now, you can even just use a plugin. So there's a lot of .bit addresses, and because it's not maintained by one single authority, it cannot be abused. It's just like Bitcoin as a currency. It cannot be duplicated. It cannot be abused. It cannot be hacked by one single person because it is distributed amongst millions of people and computers. Same is true with Namecoin, and it uses the blockchain for the purpose of securing domain names. Then we have another one that came about called Dogecoin. Dogecoin, if you're not familiar with Doge as a meme, Doge is a meme similar to the lolcat. There was the lolcat, which is, as you probably know, ICANN has cheeseburger. There became another meme called Doge, and somebody decided to make a Dogecoin, and its representation was a Shiba Inu, and it was created as a joke, but it was such a popular meme that when it first came out, it skyrocketed to be one of the most popular altcoins. More and more coins have come out, such as TerraCoin, FeatherCoin, PeerCoin, FryCoin. FryCoin is another one with a purpose. It's a currency, but it is designed to lose value if you keep it in your wallet. So it is encouraging spending. If you spend it, it keeps the same value, but if you hold it in your wallet, it will lose value over time. It will decay, basically. And then there were a lot of other coins, more than I'll even list in a slide here, but there were tons and tons of coins that were created by speculators. People who came into this to try and pump and dump. They hyped up their coins, saying, look at how much, all the hype around these coins, got the value of it, so people would buy it and jump into it, and then they dumped it. Kind of just like people do with stocks. You do a pump and dump. So there are some good aspects of these alternate coins, and of course, there are bad players who have coins that have bad aspects. But all in all, there are so many possibilities that can be used with this. There can be coins for different types of businesses. Somebody created something called Potcoin, which is intended to be used by marijuana dispensaries. There are coins for every purpose that you could possibly imagine. There are coins can be used by a company to distribute stock in that company. The company can create their own alternate coin, create their own blockchain, and use that as a representation of stock of ownership in the company. Again, it decentralizes it. And that's what the whole idea about Bitcoin is. It's decentralization. Now I'd like to talk for a moment about the currency. Patrick Byrne, the CEO of Overstock.com, was a pioneer in Bitcoin in being the first major retailer to accept Bitcoin as a form of payment. You could go to Overstock.com and purchase something and pay for it in Bitcoin and have it delivered to your house. This raises the question of whether is Bitcoin a currency or is Bitcoin just a method of payment? It depends on what they're going to do with it at the other end. In some interviews, he mentioned that he is keeping some of it in Bitcoin, but he does have to translate. As soon as you pay in Bitcoin, a portion of that has to be converted back to dollars, simply because his employees and his suppliers are currently expecting payment in dollars. So it's kind of a chicken and egg thing. The more that it's used, it eventually starts to spread, and once suppliers say, okay, you can pay us in Bitcoin, then there will be no need to change it to dollars. And that brings us to being able to buy in Bitcoin, sell in Bitcoin, and use Bitcoin. Just like, again, Nixon's speech, Americans who buy American products in America, your dollar will be worth just as much tomorrow as it is today. If you're paid in Bitcoin and you purchase things in Bitcoin, then your Bitcoin will be worth the same as it is tomorrow as it is today, regardless of what the dollar value is. Other companies have followed suit. Sacramento Kings were one of the first sports teams to accept Bitcoin as payment for tickets to the games. Zynga, Virgin Galactic, WordPress, Tiger Direct was being another major retailer that followed suit shortly after Overstock. And even bullies are now accepting Bitcoin, as seen by this little banner that was shown in an opening scene of an episode of The Simpsons. Bitcoin is spreading. The idea is spreading. More and more people are knowing about it. The more people are aware of it, the more people use it, the more popular it will become. The thing to be worried about is the security. Securing your Bitcoins. The thing about Bitcoins is that, similar to paper currency, if you lose your wallet, if you had $100 in your wallet and you were walking down the street and your wallet fell out of your pocket on the sidewalk, that $100 is lost forever. Sure, in this case, somebody else may find it, but let's say it fell down a drain pipe and went into the sewer, never to be seen again. That $100 bill is gone forever. Same thing is true with Bitcoin. If you lose access to your private key, you lose those Bitcoins that were held by that private key. So it's very important to be secure about secure your Bitcoins and secure your private key. Hackers, that's another thing to be aware of. Hackers can break into your system and try to convert your public key. So you don't want to create the software will generate a pretty complex public key, but there are some software that will let you create your own private key. And if you make a private key of, say, hello, that's going to be very easy for someone to hack. If you make your private key something really complex, it'll be much more difficult to hack. Another thing to do is to keep it offline. They call that a paper wallet. That's where you generate your public key. You have your private key. You use that to generate a public key, but the private key is never stored on a computer. You don't use a wallet software. You just keep it on a piece of paper, put it in a vault somewhere, put it away somewhere in your house, lock it up safely. That's another way to secure your Bitcoin. But the important thing is to keep in mind that it must be secured. Because if you lose your private key, you lose your Bitcoins. You can password protect your account, but you don't want to lose that password. Because again, if you lose the password to your wallet, you won't be able to access your private keys, and you will lose those Bitcoins forever. This is a QR code. This is what most stores will be using to represent your Bitcoin. This one here represents my Bitcoin address. So if anybody wants to send me some Bitcoins, all you'd have to do is take out your phone, scan that code, and that code will translate into my public key. You still won't have my private key, but you'd have the public key. So when you go to a store, you can use that. They will have that to pay. So when you want to pay, when Bitcoin becomes popular enough that it's available in your stores, that you can go to 7-Eleven and buy a cup of coffee and use Bitcoin to pay for it, the store would have a QR code similar to this. You would open up your app, select the amount of Bitcoin whatever the cost is, scan that QR code, and be able to send those Bitcoins. Very easy to do. And it's a growing technology right now. Bitcoin as a protocol, Bitcoin as the blockchain in general, as a protocol, is in its infancy. It is today where the internet was in 1990. If in 1990 people were saying the internet will be used, email is going to replace correspondence by mail, that's impossible. The mail service will be there forever. And lo and behold, we're not sending letters to each other by mail anymore. For the most part, we're sending each other emails. Even banks are jumping in on this, where they don't want to spend 48 cents on a stamp to send you a statement at the end of the month, and they're trying to entice you to sign up for paperless billing, where they just send you your statements by email. So what was thought was impossible in 1990 became a reality. So we are in the infancy of this. Where Bitcoin grows, where it goes today, who knows where it could go. One of the possibilities that people are talking about is used for voting. Everybody who's an eligible voter gets distributed a vote coin, and you spend that by sending it to the candidate of your choice. That would eliminate, if you think about this, that would be stored in the blockchain, a public record. That would eliminate any voter fraud. That would eliminate the problems that we had in the past of hanging chads, miscounts, anything like that, because It's all in the public record, decentralized in a blockchain. So Bitcoin, there's the Bitcoin, the protocol, there's Bitcoin, the currency. Bitcoin, the currency, we'll see if it will take off. Again, it's a chicken and egg situation. The more people start using it, the more people are aware of it, the more people will start using it, and then the more people will jump on board to use it. And eventually, people may be able to be paid in Bitcoin, suppliers and employees. And then the Bitcoin, the protocol, something again in its infancy, but it's a technology, a networking technology that has limitless possibilities, not only in something like currency, but something that can be used for many other purposes. Some of the examples that I've used were it can be used for distributing company stock, it can be used for voting, it can be used even in smaller communities for voting. It can be used for many different ways of things that you would need to keep a public record of that can be secure. It's secure not in the fact of one central authority holding it, but secure in the fact that everybody has a same copy of the entire public record. So nobody can make a change and do something to change it. I would like to now open up if anybody has any questions about this. I'd like to open up the floor for some Q&A.
Okay, Jonathan, I don't see any questions yet, but let's see if somebody types something in. A very interesting topic, confusing for those of us who don't think in terms like this. But
Absolutely.
your presentation is a good introduction for those of us that don't have a clue of what it is, but are trying to get a handle on it. So thank you for that. We do have somebody that is typing.
Yes, this is not meant to, there's a lot more to Bitcoin. This is meant as an introductory to Bitcoin. There are a lot of resources that you go onto the internet and listen. A lot of what I learned about Bitcoin was through listening to podcasts. And I want to recommend one out there. There's a network called Let's Talk. If you go to Let's Talk Bitcoin, I think it's .org. You just Google Let's Talk Bitcoin. That's a network of podcasts, and I listen to those regularly, and they're very, very informative. And they talk about the trends that are happening in Bitcoin, not only as the currency, but more so as the protocol.
Okay,
Okay, so
Don has asked a question. How would someone know if a cost for an item in Bitcoin is reasonable?
well, it's the same way as I mentioned in the example about using the dollar. When I go into a store, I know dollars right now because that's what we use as a currency. So when I go into a store, I know what that dollar means because I'm paid in dollars. I've been spending dollars my whole life. So when I go into a store and something costs $1, I know what that dollar means. I couldn't put any other value on it other than just what I internally know that dollar means to me based on how much money I make and how valuable it is to me. But if I go to a foreign country, I have to translate that. Let's say Thailand, I have to translate baht to dollars before I will have a sense of what that is. So right now, today, being that it's not as a established currency, you would have to translate that to dollars, looking at the current exchange rate. There's websites like BTC-E.com is just an example of one of the exchange sites that can give you an exchange rate. Coinbase.com is a place where you can exchange bitcoins for dollars for bitcoins and vice versa, and that would give you an idea of what something is worth. But once it gets to a point where people are paid in Bitcoin, your earnings come in Bitcoin, and then you're spending Bitcoin, you will just intrinsically know based on how much you make, how much whether an item that you purchase is worth it in Bitcoin. It's just the way that today you know when you buy something, you look at the price tag in dollars and you know what that's worth.
How much does the value of a Bitcoin change in, say, a week or a month? There are a lot of fluctuations, aren't there?
Oh yeah, it's right now it is very volatile, and there's a lot of factors in that because there are some people who are using Bitcoin as an investment as opposed to being a currency. Uh, right now, Bitcoin is not really being used as a currency. It's used if you look at places like Overstock and Tiger Direct and other places that are accepting Bitcoin, they're using it more as a method of payment, similar to using your credit card. One of the benefits is, and this is actually interesting because there's no downside for someone to accept Bitcoins, because when you're accepting Bitcoins as a method of payment, there is no cost. The cost is actually to the person sending the Bitcoins, and it's a very minimal cost. You can send Bitcoins for like pennies. It's really very cheap to send Bitcoins, but the receiver does not pay anything. Right now, if I were to buy something on Overstock and use my MasterCard, Overstock has to pay a percentage of that as a fee to MasterCard, the central authority. Whereas with Bitcoin, they don't have to pay anything. They do have to. What they have to do is they use a place something like Coinbase, who will transfer it back into dollars. They'll charge a fee for the transfer of it to transfer it back into dollars. But keeping it in Bitcoin doesn't cost anything. So uh, that's the value of it. It will fluctuate based on many factors. At some point, it will eventually stabilize. But I guess the answer to that is what the value is. It's going to be similar to the foreign currency exchange. If you look at it as a currency, what is one currency worth versus another? What is the dollar worth against the euro? What is euro worth against the yen? What is yen worth against the Bitcoin?
If I were a business and accepted Bitcoin and kept it as a Bitcoin, then what you're saying, the value of what I just sold can rise and fall. So I can make the possibility of making a lot of money on that transaction is unknown, but it can be considerable.
Well, that is where we stand today. That's looking at the Bitcoin as an investment, as we receiving it for payment, but holding on to it as an investment. Because today the store still has to convert it back to dollars at some point in order to pay their staff and to pay their suppliers for the goods that they're selling. So if it comes when we get to a point where the employers, the staff in the store, and the suppliers will accept Bitcoin, then they won't have to translate it into dollars. So they're not going to. So it's that at that point, it's no longer an investment; it is simply a currency.
But if the time span from them doing to making the exchange, they could make additional profit though.
Right now, yes, and that could be the same for any foreign currency. Because if somebody, especially in the internet world, where you could buy something from a store on the other side of the planet. You could buy something from a store in England, for instance, and you're paying in dollars. They could hold it in dollars, or they could, and that would be an investment, or they could immediately you pay them, and if they convert it immediately to pound sterling, and then it's not an investment. So I'm saying, so if you buy something in Bitcoin and they hold it in Bitcoin in England, they're going to pay their employees in pounds. They're not going to pay them in dollars. So when you buy something and you charge that purchase to your credit card, they're going to be receiving those dollars, and it's going to be converted. You generally buy MasterCard if you're paying by credit card or Visa. They will convert it to their local currency. But if they kept it in dollars, then that could be looked at as an investment in foreign currency, because they're not going to pay their employees in dollars. They're going to be paying their employees in pounds.
Okay, there's one final comment, and then we'll end. Don says, so if something completely new were invented, like the first smartphone, and they only priced it in Bitcoin, it would be very difficult to evaluate.
Huh, something that's it and priced in Bitcoin. Well, that would be a interesting experiment. I don't think anybody is going to be bold enough to do that right now, but that might be something that might happen in the future. I think right now there are certain things that are priced only in Bitcoin, but they're generally things that are related to Bitcoin. For example, there's an item that was called the Trezor, which is a hardware wallet that stores your Bitcoin. It's a piece of hardware with a little computer, like well, similar to a smartphone, but that stores your Bitcoin. It stores your keys basically. That it cost 1 Bitcoin to purchase. It cost 1 Bitcoin to purchase back when Bitcoins were $10 a Bitcoin, and it cost 1 Bitcoin to purchase when Bitcoins were at $1,200 a Bitcoin, and it still costs 1 Bitcoin to purchase it now that Bitcoins are $350. That's something that's priced in Bitcoin, and it is meant but it's a device that's used for Bitcoin, so it stays within the world of Bitcoin, if that makes any sense. A smartphone, which is something that anybody would use, like an Android or an iPhone type of thing, if somebody were to price that only in Bitcoin, it would right now that would limit its market because a lot of people wouldn't jump into that until Bitcoin becomes more popular. But it would be interesting to see how that would affect Bitcoin because that could be something that would popularize Bitcoin.
Okay, Don's typing in one final comment, and thank you so much, Jonathan. This has been an intriguing session. It's going to be interesting to watch and see what happens with Bitcoins.
Yes, this
With
is infancy. We're in infancy. Where it goes from here, just like the internet in the 1990s, look where we are today. This is the infancy. I couldn't even speculate on where it will be, but I'm so intrigued to see where this goes, and I'm excited.
Absolutely. I can remember back in the early 90s teaching class or having people teaching classes on what is the internet, and so obviously we're headed that way with Bitcoins, and we're going to see and hear a lot more about it. So at this point, we're going to go ahead and cut this off, and thank you so much.
Thank you. Pleasure doing